So yeah, we are just leaving Stirling Castle here, and we heard a bang under the bus. And now the bus driver's out, shaking his head. Bus has stopped, air condition stopped. So our day starts off on the tender, away from the regal princess, heading into town. We jump on the bus, and we're off to our first stop, the Stirling Castle tour. Now, we saw a lot of interesting things, some old architecture, and including a little bit of these giant horse head statues on the side of the road. Unfortunately, our guide never really told us what they were or what they were there for, but I guess they're interesting. But then we arrived at our first stop and confusion happened. So, we just got to our first stop, which is a visitor's center. And there's a monument over here. You can see Edward, the timelines are down here. William Wallace and Andrew Murray win the Battle of Stirling Bridge, etc. But there's a monument over here. But literally get off the bus at 2 minutes after 11. And they said everyone has to be back on the bus at 11:15. So we have exactly 13 minutes to visit this site. Now I think it's because we took so long to get to shore. We were the last tour group to leave from the theater, and then the shuttles took a while to load, and then a shuttle took a while to unload, and then the drive here. Really strange, but coming up, lots of dogs out on the run. But I have just enough time to walk up and then turn around and walk back. Crazy. So I rush up to the monument, and this is the Battle of Bannockburn, I think it's pronounced, where Robert the Bruce stopped the English from reaching Stirling Castle. And this is one of the most pivotal battles between the English and Scotland. It's actually the one that, because Robert the Bruce won, he was able to get alliances from the rest of the noblemen that allowed him to start becoming King of Scotland. And he remained King of Scotland until his death many years later. A big pivotal turning point, and it's marked with a Robert the Bruce statue off in the distance, riding majestically on his horse. And beautiful area here. It's a dog park as well. Dogs are able to run around, and people from the town use this for jogging. And way off in the distance, you can just make out Stirling Castle. It's only 2 miles away, and it's rather daunting. Imagine being in those days and having to storm that castle. Crazy. So, I just got a text message from Tony as I'm rushing back from the monument because they said we only had 15 minutes. Well, apparently we're here not till 11:15, but we're here till 12:15. So yeah, a little difference there. So into the center we went, and it was actually a little tour. And this gentleman in here was a jack of all trades. He ran the gift shop, he did the tour, and he was great.
Or explain anything you thought I hadn't explained very well, rather than have you just sit or stand there in the dark and listen to me with her on. Okay? The first feature I want to introduce you to, Stirling Castle. Almost exactly 2 miles to the north of us, which is that way, both on the map and in real life. In June 1314, Stirling is English. Hopefully you remember that from our introductory film.
So yeah, he was really informative and kept the talk about 10-15 minutes, where he discussed what happened with the battle and how the English actually lost most of their soldiers. It wasn't in the battle, it was them just trying to get away from the battle. And then we walked out into a large screen room that depicted different sections of the battle, different folklore of what happened during that battle, and why it was so tragic for the English and how badly they lost in this fight. They actually outnumbered Robert the Bruce more than 2-1, and they still lost. And then you have this little cinematic at the end. It reminds me of like marionette puppets that you would do for kids, but it really just goes into detail, and it really kind of fascinating. So yeah, this was a great way to start off our tour, and then it was back on the bus over to Stirling Castle and getting ready to go inside. Now here we got to see Stirling Castle. We walked through the open gates here across the little drawbridge, and it is a tourist area. A lot of the castle they're restoring, so it's kind of like fake inside, but it gives you a good depiction of what it did. A lot of it is realistic and right back from that time period. It is a very awe-inspiring castle, and you can just imagine how cold and dank, and the fires going, and the cells as you're walking through the hallways. They did have a lot of tapestry and costumes that people were wearing. There were actors and actresses inside portraying chambermaids and gentlemen of the house. There was a gentleman in there telling us about Scottish heritage, and you could many Americans actually have families that are, you could trace all the way back to Scottish heritage as far as connections were concerned. And so very interesting. I really enjoyed going through this castle. One of the best parts that I just can't get over is always how dominant it is over the landscape. And you could just tell. I mean, you line these things up. Now, back in Robert the Bruce's day, they didn't have cannon, of course. This has been modernized at one point, but look at the landscape and how much of a view you have from the castle. Nobody is sneaking up on Stirling Castle. You can see for miles and miles around, and it's absolutely breathtaking up there. You can see parts of the town. You can see the old cemetery. Some of those stones dating back to the 1300s. And other monuments in the distance. One of my favorite places when I was walking around Stirling Castle was the garden. And it was just this little courtyard area where the Queen and King used to visit. Also, very great views from this area as well. The lush garden was beautiful, and basically a place that if you want to take pictures, this was a great place. Inside, like I said, a lot of the things, you have original stonework, but then you have reconstructed ceilings, and these are not the original ceilings because they never survived, obviously, but they did a reproduction to give you a feel of what happened. And as I said before, they had various actors in there explaining how things worked and why there was a bedroom and an office, while the office in the Queen was actually more important than being a bedroom. The reason they had a bed in there, it was to show that if you were able to get into that room, you were a trusted person of the throne to be allowed in a room where the Queen has a bedroom. Also, again, just the dominance of the landscape. I couldn't get enough. There was a lot of places you could walk around and climb up to get different views all around the castle. It was, it just threw me back into the history of the area. The stonework on the monuments, the stoneworks along the castle, all still original and beautiful. And every place you walk, you could sneak away and climb higher. Nothing is even here, by the way. These are not even steps. Some of these steps are almost 2 feet high to get up. And sometimes it's just worth it. That climb with the view is absolutely spectacular and absolutely worth that climb if you can make it. Again, I just was awe-inspired by Stirling Castle. So yeah, we are just leaving Stirling Castle here, and we heard a bang under the bus, and now the bus driver's out shaking his head. Bus has stopped, air conditioning stopped. But this is one of those reasons you take your risk if you're not booking a princess cruise from the ship. They'll wait for us, but if this was a private tour, they won't. So luckily we still have a lot of time left, but the bus driver is looking a little perplexed.
This was done yesterday.
Nothing ever happens to me. I've never been on anything where anything's ever happened.
We're moving again. And they said, cross our fingers. This is a pretty steep roads to cross our fingers. But I'll trust them. So this was a tender port. It's a lot of walking. You'll have to be aware of that if you're going ashore. And our way back, it doesn't look very rough here. But once you get out past this breakwater, out towards the bridge, it got very rough out there to the point where we were bouncing pretty good. Somebody was sick on the tender. And you can see here just how much we're splashing away in those waves. Yeah, not the easiest ride back. So that was my visit to Stirling Castle. I really enjoyed myself there. I love the old, that era of living, and just seeing how the fortifications of a castle and how daunting it must have been for an army to try and lay siege to something like that's that dominant in the landscape. Take away all the modern buildings that were out there, and they could see for miles and miles and miles and miles before anybody would ever be able to reach them. And the castle never fell. It was surrendered, but it never fell. That's how dominant Stirling Castle was. So yeah, pretty enjoyable day. A little bit of a mix-up at the first stop. Then the bus incident. Yeah, and we could feel there was something wrong with the bus on the way back. You can hear almost like a little grinding when we were coming to a stop, so I think something got loose on the brakes, but it was still drivable. We stopped fine. He tested it a few times, so I wasn't worried about that, but just goes to show, had this been a private bus and it would have been worse than it was, we might have missed the ship by the time we got back. So it's a hit and miss when you go on your own. Luckily for us this time, we were on a princess excursion and they would have waited for us, but we got back anyway and had a pretty darn good time.